adventures of pamphlet novels, and were keeping company with dukes and earls. Others, whose briefer span forbade their devoting themselves to studies so abstruse, beguiled the little tedium of the way with penny papers. A party of girls, and one young man, on opposite sides of the car, found huge amusement in a game of ball. They tossed it to and fro, with peals of laughter that might be measured by mile lengths, for, faster than the nimble ball could fly, the merry players fled unconsciously along, leaving the trail of their mirth afar behind, and ending their game under another sky than had witnessed its commencement. Boys, with apples, cakes, candy, and rolls of variously tinctured lozenges, merchandise that reminded Hepzibah of her deserted shop, appeared at each momentary stopping place, doing up their business in a hurry, or breaking it short off, lest the market should ravish them away with it. New people continually entered. Old acquaintances, for such they soon grew to be, in this rapid current of affairs, continually departed. Here and there, amid the rumble and the tumult, sat one asleep. Sleep, sport, business, graver or lighter study, and the common and inevitable movement onward. It was life itself. Clifford's naturally poignant sympathies were all aroused. He caught the color of what was passing about him, and threw it back more vividly than he received it, but mixed, nevertheless, with a lurid and portentous hue. Hepzibah, on the other hand, felt herself more apart from humankind than even in the seclusion which she had just quitted. "You are not happy, Hepzibah," said Clifford, apart, in a tone of reproach. "You are thinking of that dismal old house, and of Cousin Jaffrey," here came the quake through him, "and of Cousin Jaffrey sitting there, all by himself. Take my advice, follow my example, and let such things slip aside. Here we are, in the world, Hepzibah, in the midst of life, in the throng of our fellow beings. Let you and I be happy. As happy as that youth and those pretty girls, at their game of ball." Happy, thought Hepzibah, bitterly conscious, at the word, of her dull and heavy heart, with the frozen pain in it, happy. He is mad already, and, if I could once feel myself broad awake, I should go mad too. If a fixed idea be madness, she was perhaps not remote from it. Fast and far as they had rattled and clattered along the iron track, they might just as well, as regarded Hepzibah's mental images, have been passing up and down Pinekean Street. With miles and miles of varied scenery between, there was no scene for her save the 7 old gable peaks, with their moss, and the tuft of weeds in one of the angles, and the shop window, and a customer shaking the door, and compelling the little bell to jingle fiercely, but without disturbing Judge Pinekean. This one old house was everywhere. It transported its great, lumbering bulk with more than railroad speed, and set itself phlegmatically down on whatever spot she glanced at. The quality of Hepzibah's mind was too unmalleable to take new impressions so readily as Clifford's. He had a winged nature, she was rather of the vegetable kind, and could hardly be kept long alive, if drawn up by the roots. Thus it happened that the relation heretofore existing between her brother and herself was changed. At home, she was his guardian; here, Clifford had become hers, and seemed to comprehend whatever belonged to their new position with a singular rapidity of intelligence. He had been startled into manhood and intellectual vigor, or, at least, into a condition that resembled them, though it might be both diseased and transitory. The conductor now applied for their tickets, and Clifford, who had made himself the purse-bearer, put a bank-note into his hand, as he had observed others do. "For the lady and yourself?" asked the conductor. "And how far?" "As far as that will carry us," said Clifford. "It is no great matter. We are riding for pleasure merely." "You choose a strange day for it, sir," remarked a gimlet-eyed old gentleman on the other side of the car, looking at Clifford and his companion, as if curious to make them out. "The best chance of pleasure, in an easterly rain, I take it, is in a man's own house, with a nice little fire in the chimney." "I cannot precisely agree with you," said Clifford, courteously bowing to the old gentleman, and at once taking up the clue of conversation which the latter had proffered. "It had just occurred to me, on the contrary, that this admirable invention of the railroad, with the vast and inevitable improvements to be looked for, both as to speed and convenience, is destined to do away with those stale ideas of home and fireside, and substitute something better." "In the name of common sense," asked the old gentleman rather testily, "what can be better for a man than his own parlor and chimney corner?" "These things have not the merit which many good people attribute to them," replied Clifford. "They may be said, in few and pithy words, to have ill-served a poor purpose. My impression is, that our wonderfully increased and still increasing facilities of locomotion are destined to bring us around again to the nomadic state. You are aware, my dear sir, you must have observed it in your own experience, that all human progress is in a circle, or, to use a more accurate and beautiful figure, in an ascending spiral curve. While we fancy ourselves going straight forward, and attaining, at every step, an entirely new position of affairs, we do actually return to something long ago tried and abandoned, but which we now find etherealized, refined, and perfected to its ideal. The past is but a coarse and sensual prophecy of the present and the future. To apply this truth to the topic now under discussion. In the early epochs of our race, men dwelt in temporary huts, of bowers of branches, as easily constructed as a bird's nest, and which they built, if it should be called building, when such sweet homes of a summer solstice rather grew than were made with hands, which nature, we will say, assisted them to rear where fruit abounded, where fish and game were plentiful, or, most especially, where the sense of beauty was to be gratified by a lovelier shade than elsewhere, and a more exquisite arrangement of lake, wood, and hill. This life possessed a charm which, ever since man quitted it, has vanished from existence. And it typified something better than itself. It had its drawbacks, such as hunger and thirst, inclement weather, hot sunshine, and weary and foot-blistering marches over barren and ugly tracts, that lay between the sites desirable for their fertility and beauty. But in our ascending spiral, we escape all this. These railroads, could but the whistle be made musical, and the rumble and the jar got rid of, are positively the greatest blessing that the ages have wrought out for us. They give us wings, they annihilate the toil and dust of pilgrimage, they spiritualize travel. Transition being so facile, what can be any man's inducement to tarry in one spot? Why, therefore, should he build a more cumbrous habitation than can readily be carried off with him? Why should he make himself a prisoner for life in brick, and stone, and old worm-eaten timber, when he may just as easily dwell, in one sense, nowhere, in a better sense, wherever the fit and beautiful shall offer him a home? Clifford's countenance glowed, as he divulged this theory. A youthful character shone out from within, converting the wrinkles and pallid duskiness of age into an almost transparent mask. The merry girls let their ball drop upon the floor, and gazed at him. They said to themselves, perhaps, that, before his hair was grey and the crow's feet tracked his temples, this now decaying man must have stamped the impress of his features on many a woman's heart. But, alas! No woman's eye had seen his face while it was beautiful. I should scarcely call it an improved state of things, observed Clifford's new acquaintance, to live everywhere and nowhere. Would you not? Exclaimed Clifford, with singular energy. It is as clear to me as sunshine, were there any in the sky, that the greatest possible stumbling blocks in the path of human happiness and improvement are these heaps of bricks and stones, consolidated with mortar, or hewn timber, fastened together with spike nails, which men painfully contrive for their own torment, and call them house and home. The soul needs air, a wide sweep and frequent change of it. Morbid influences, in a thousand-fold variety, gather about hearths, and pollute the life of households. There is no such unwholesome atmosphere as that of an old home, rendered poisonous by one's defunct forefathers and relatives. I speak of what I know. There is a certain house within my familiar recollection, one of those peaked gable, there are 7 of them, projecting storied edifices, such as you occasionally see in our older towns, a rusty, crazy, creaky, dry-rotted, dingy, dark, and miserable old dungeon, with an arched window over the porch, and a little shop door on one side, and a great, melancholy elm before it. Now, sir, whenever my thoughts recur to this 7-gabled mansion, the fact is so very curious that I must needs mention it. Immediately I have a vision or image of an elderly man, of remarkably stern countenance, sitting in an oaken elbow chair, dead, stone dead, with an ugly flow of blood upon his shirt bosom. Dead, but with open eyes. He taints the whole house, as I remember it. I could never flourish there, nor be happy, nor do nor enjoy what God meant me to do and enjoy. His face darkened, and seemed to contract, and shrivel itself up, and wither into age. Never, sir, he repeated. I could never draw cheerful breath there. I should think not, said the old gentleman, eyeing Clifford earnestly, and rather apprehensively. I should conceive not, sir, with that notion in your head. Surely not, continued Clifford, and it were a relief to me if that house could be torn down, or burnt up, and so the earth be rid of it, and grass be sown abundantly over its foundation. Not that I should ever visit its site again. For, sir, the farther I get away from it, the more does the joy, the lightsome freshness, the heart leap, the intellectual dance, the youth, in short, yes, my youth, the more does it come back to me. No longer ago than this morning, I was old. I remember looking in the glass, and wondering at my own grey hair, and the wrinkles, many and deep, right across my brow, and the furrows down my cheeks, and the prodigious trampling of crow's feet about my temples. It was too soon. I could not bear it. Age had no right to come. I had not lived. But now do I look old? If so, my aspect belies me strangely, for, a great weight being off my mind, I feel in the very heyday of my youth, with the world and my best days before me. I trust you may find it so, said the old gentleman, who seemed rather embarrassed, and desirous of avoiding the observation which Clifford's wild talk drew on them both. You have my best wishes for it. For heaven's sake, dear Clifford, be quiet, whispered his sister. They think you mad. Be quiet yourself, Hepzibah, returned her brother. No matter what they think. I am not mad. For the first time in 30 years my thoughts gush up and find words ready for them. I must talk, and I will. He turned again towards the old gentleman, and renewed the conversation. Yes, my dear sir, said he, it is my firm belief and hope that these terms of roof and hearthstone, which have so long been held to embody something sacred, are soon to pass out of men's daily use, and be forgotten. Just imagine, for a moment, how much of human evil will crumble away, with this one change. What we call real estate, the solid ground to build a house on, is the broad foundation on which nearly all the guilt of this world rests. A man will commit almost any wrong, he will heap up an immense pile of wickedness, as hard as granite, and which will weigh as heavily upon his soul, to eternal ages, only to build a great, gloomy, dark-chambered mansion, for himself to die in, and for his posterity to be miserable in. He lays his own dead corpse beneath the underpinning, as one may say, and hangs his frowning picture on the wall, and, after thus converting himself into an evil destiny, expects his remotest great-grandchildren to be happy there. I do not speak wildly. I have just such a house in my mind's eye. Then, sir, said the old gentleman, getting anxious to drop the subject, you are not to blame for leaving it. Within the lifetime of the child already born, Clifford went on, all this will be done away. The world is growing too ethereal and spiritual to bear these enormities a great while longer. To me, though, for a considerable period of time, I have lived chiefly in retirement, and know less of such things than most men, even to me, the harbingers of a better era are unmistakable. Mesmerism, now. Will that effect nothing, think you, towards purging away the grossness out of human life. All a humbug, growled the old gentleman. These rapping spirits, that little Phoebe told us of, the other day, said Clifford, what are these but the messengers of the spiritual world, knocking at the door of substance? And it shall be flung wide open. A humbug, again, cried the old gentleman, growing more and more testy at these glimpses of Clifford's metaphysics. I should like to rap with a good stick on the empty pates of the dolts who circulate such nonsense. Then there is electricity, the demon, the angel, the mighty physical power, the all-pervading intelligence, exclaimed Clifford. Is that a humbug, too? Is it a fact, or have I dreamt it, that, by means of electricity, the world of matter has become a great nerve, vibrating thousands of miles in a breathless point of time? Rather, the round globe is a vast head, a brain, instinct with intelligence. Or, shall we say, it is itself a thought, nothing but thought, and no longer the substance which we deemed it. If you mean the telegraph, said the old gentleman, glancing his eye toward its wire, alongside the rail track, it is an excellent thing, that is, of course, if the speculators in cotton and politics don't get possession of it. A great thing, indeed, sir, particularly as regards the detection of bank robbers and murderers. I don't quite like it, in that point of view, replied Clifford. A bank robber, and what you call a murderer, likewise, has his rights, which men of enlightened humanity and conscience should regard in so much the more liberal spirit, because the bulk of society is prone to controvert their existence. An almost spiritual medium, like the electric telegraph, should be consecrated to high, deep, joyful, and holy missions. Lovers, day by day, hour by hour, if so often moved to do it, might send their heart-throbs from Maine to Florida, with some such words as these: I love you forever. My heart runs over with love. I love you more than I can, and, again, at the next message, I have lived an hour longer, and love you twice as much. Or, when a good man has departed, his distant friend should be conscious of an electric thrill, as from the world of happy spirits, telling him your dear friend is in bliss. Or, to an absent husband, should come tidings thus: an immortal being, of whom you are the father, has this moment come from God, and immediately its little voice would seem to have reached so far, and to be echoing in his heart. But for these poor rogues, the bank robbers, who, after all, are about as honest as 9 people in 10, except that they disregard certain formalities, and prefer to transact business at midnight rather than change hours, and for these murderers, as you phrase it, who are often excusable in the motives of their deed, and deserve to be ranked among public benefactors, if we consider only its result, for unfortunate individuals like these, I really cannot applaud the enlistment of an immaterial and miraculous power in the universal world hunt at their heels. You can't, hey? Cried the old gentleman, with a hard look. Positively, no, answered Clifford. It puts them too miserably at disadvantage. For example, sir, in a dark, low, cross-beamed, panelled room of an old house, let us suppose a dead man, sitting in an armchair, with a blood stain on his shirt bosom, and let us add to our hypothesis another man, issuing from the house, which he feels to be overfilled with the dead man's presence, and let us lastly imagine him fleeing, heaven knows whither, at the speed of a hurricane, by railroad. Now, sir, if the fugitive alight in some distant town, and find all the people babbling about that self-same dead man, whom he has fled so far to avoid the sight and thought of, will you not allow that his natural rights have been infringed? He has been deprived of his city of refuge, and, in my humble opinion, has suffered infinite wrong. You are a strange man, sir, said the old gentleman, bringing his gimlet eye to a point on Clifford, as if determined to bore right into him. I can't see through you. No, I'll be bound you can't, cried Clifford, laughing. And yet, my dear sir, I am as transparent as the water of Maule's well. But come, Hepzibah. We have flown far enough for once. Let us alight, as the birds do, and perch ourselves on the nearest twig, and consult whither we shall fly next. Just then, as it happened, the train reached a solitary way station. Taking advantage of the brief pause, Clifford left the car, and drew Hepzibah along with him. A moment afterwards, the train, with all the life of its interior, amid which Clifford had made himself so conspicuous an object, was gliding away in the distance, and rapidly lessening to a point which, in another moment, vanished. The world had fled away from these two wanderers. They gazed drearily about them. At a little distance stood a wooden church, black with age, and in a dismal state of ruin and decay, with broken windows, a great rift through the main body of the edifice, and a rafter dangling from the top of the square tower. Farther off was a farmhouse, in the old style, as venerably black as the church, with a roof sloping downward from the 3-story peak, to within a man's height of the ground. It seemed uninhabited. There were the relics of a wood pile, indeed, near the door, but with grass sprouting up among the chips and scattered logs. The small raindrops came down aslant. The wind was not turbulent, but sullen, and full of chilly moisture. Clifford shivered from head to foot. The wild effervescence of his mood, which had so readily supplied thoughts, fantasies, and a strange aptitude of words, and impelled him to talk from the mere necessity of giving vent to this bubbling up gush of ideas, had entirely subsided. A powerful excitement had given him energy and vivacity. Its operation over, he forthwith began to sink. "You must take the lead now, Hepzibah," murmured he, with a torpid and reluctant utterance. "Do with me as you will." She knelt down upon the platform where they were standing and lifted her clasped hands to the sky. The dull, grey weight of clouds made it invisible, but it was no hour for disbelief, no juncture this to question that there was a sky above, and an Almighty Father looking from it. "O God!" ejaculated poor, gaunt Hepzibah, then paused a moment, to consider what her prayer should be. "O God, our Father, are we not thy children? Have mercy on us." 18 Governor Pinekian Judge Pinekian, while his two relatives have fled away with such ill-considered haste, still sits in the old parlor, keeping house, as the familiar phrase is, in the absence of its ordinary occupants. To him, and to the venerable house of the Seven Gables, does our story now betake itself, like an owl, bewildered in the daylight, and hastening back to his hollow tree. The judge has not shifted his position for a long while now. He has not stirred hand or foot, nor withdrawn his eyes so much as a hair's breadth from their fixed gaze towards the corner of the room, since the footsteps of Hepzibah and Clifford creaked along the passage, and the outer door was closed cautiously behind their exit. He holds his watch in his left hand, but clutched in such a manner that you cannot see the dial plate. How profound a fit of meditation! Or, supposing him asleep, how infantile a quietude of conscience, and what wholesome order in the gastric region, are betokened by slumber so entirely undisturbed with starts, cramp, twitches, muttered dream talk, trumpet blasts through the nasal organ, or any slightest irregularity of breath. You must hold your own breath, to satisfy yourself whether he breathes at all. It is quite inaudible. You hear the ticking of his watch, his breath you do not hear. A most refreshing slumber, doubtless. And yet, the judge cannot be asleep. His eyes are open. A veteran politician, such as he, would never fall asleep with wide open eyes, lest some enemy or mischief-maker, taking him thus at unawares, should peep through these windows into his consciousness, and make strange discoveries among the reminiscences, projects, hopes, apprehensions, weaknesses, and strong points, which he has heretofore shared with nobody. A cautious man is proverbially said to sleep with one eye open. That may be wisdom, but not with both, for this were heedlessness. No, no. Judge Pinkian cannot be asleep. It is odd, however, that a gentleman so burdened with engagements, and noted, too, for punctuality, should linger thus in an old lonely mansion, which he has never seemed very fond of visiting. The oaken chair, to be sure, may tempt him with its roominess. It is, indeed, a spacious, and, allowing for the rude age that fashioned it, a moderately easy seat, with capacity enough, at all events, and offering no restraint to the judge's breadth of beam. A bigger man might find ample accommodation in it. His ancestor, now pictured upon the wall, with all his English beef about him, used hardly to present a front extending from elbow to elbow of this chair, or a base that would cover its whole cushion. But there are better chairs than this, mahogany, black walnut, rosewood, spring-seated and damask-cushioned, with varied slopes, and innumerable artifices to make them easy, and obviate the irksomeness of too tame a knees. A score of such might be at Judge Pinkian's service. Yes. In a score of drawing-rooms he would be more than welcome. Mamma would advance to meet him, with outstretched hand, the virgin daughter, elderly as he has now got to be, an old widower, as he smilingly describes himself, would shake up the cushion for the judge, and do her pretty utmost to make him comfortable. For the judge is a prosperous man. He cherishes his schemes, moreover, like other people, and reasonably brighter than most others, or did so, at least, as he lay abed this morning, in an agreeable half-drowse, planning the business of the day, and speculating on the probabilities of the next 15 years. With his firm health, and the little inroad that age has made upon him, 15 years or 20, yes, or perhaps 25, are no more than he may fairly call his own. 25 years for the enjoyment of his real estate in town and country, his railroad, bank, and insurance shares, his United States stock, his wealth, in short, however invested, now in possession, or soon to be acquired, together with the public honors that have fallen upon him, and the weightier ones that are yet to fall. It is good. It is excellent. It is enough. Still lingering in the old chair. If the judge has a little time to throw away, why does not he visit the insurance office, as is his frequent custom, and sit a while in one of their leather-cushioned armchairs, listening to the gossip of the day, and dropping some deeply designed chance word, which will be certain to become the gossip of tomorrow? And have not the bank directors a meeting at which it was the judge's purpose to be present, and his office to preside? Indeed they have, and the hour is noted on a card, which is, or ought to be, in Judge Pinekian's right vest pocket. Let him go thither, and loll at ease upon his money-bags. He has lounged long enough in the old chair. This was to have been such a busy day. In the first place, the interview with Clifford. Half an hour, by the judge's reckoning, was to suffice for that. It would probably be less, but, taking into consideration that Hepzibah was first to be dealt with, and that these women are apt to make many words where a few would do much better, it might be safest to allow half an hour. Half an hour? Why, Judge, it is already 2 hours, by your own undeviatingly accurate chronometer. Glance your eye down at it and see. Ah, he will not give himself the trouble either to bend his head, or elevate his hand, so as to bring the faithful timekeeper within his range of vision. Time, all at once, appears to have become a matter of no moment with the judge. And has he forgotten all the other items of his memoranda? Clifford's affair arranged, he was to meet a State Street broker, who has undertaken to procure a heavy percentage, and the best of paper, for a few loose thousands which the judge happens to have by him, uninvested. The wrinkled note shaver will have taken his railroad trip in vain. Half an hour later, in the street next to this, there was to be an auction of real estate, including a portion of the old Pinekian property, originally belonging to Mall's garden ground. It has been alienated from the Pinekians these 80 years, but the judge had kept it in his eye, and had set his heart on renexing it to the small domain still left around the 7 Gables, and now, during this odd fit of oblivion, the fatal hammer must have fallen, and transferred our ancient patrimony to some alien possessor. Possibly, indeed, the sale may have been postponed till fairer weather. If so, will the judge make it convenient to be present, and favor the auctioneer with his bid, on the proximate occasion? The next affair was to buy a horse for his own driving. The one heretofore his favorite stumbled, this very morning, on the road to town, and must be at once discarded. Judge Pinekian's neck is too precious to be risked on such a contingency as a stumbling steed. Should all the above business be seasonably got through with, he might attend the meeting of a charitable society, the very name of which, however, in the multiplicity of his benevolence, is quite forgotten, so that this engagement may pass unfulfilled, and no great harm done. And if he have time, amid the press of more urgent matters, he must take measures for the renewal of Mrs. Pinekian's tombstone, which, the sexton tells him, has fallen on its marble face, and is cracked quite in twain. She was a praiseworthy woman enough, thinks the judge, in spite of her nervousness, and the tears that she was so oozy with, and her foolish behavior about the coffee, and as she took her departure so seasonably, he will not grudge the second tombstone. It is better, at least, than if she had never needed any. The next item on his list was to give orders for some fruit trees, of a rare variety, to be deliverable at his country seat in the ensuing autumn. Yes, buy them, by all means, and may the peaches be luscious in your mouth, Judge Pinekian. After this comes something more important. A committee of his political party has besought him for $100 or $2, in addition to his previous disbursements, towards carrying on the fall campaign. The judge is a patriot. The fate of the country is staked on the November election, and besides, as will be shadowed forth in another paragraph, he has no trifling stake of his own in the same great game. He will do what the committee asks, nay, he will be liberal beyond their expectations. They shall have a check for $500, and more anon, if it be needed. What next? A decayed widow, whose husband was Judge Pinekian's early friend, has laid her case of destitution before him, in a very moving letter. She and her fair daughter have scarcely bread to eat. He partly intends to call on her today, perhaps so, perhaps not, accordingly as he may happen to have leisure, and a small banknote. Another business, which, however, he puts no great weight on. It is well, you know, to be heedful, but not over-anxious, as respects one's personal health. Another business, then, was to consult his family physician. About what, for heaven's sake? Why, it is rather difficult to describe the symptoms. A mere dimness of sight and dizziness of brain, was it, or disagreeable choking, or stifling, or gurgling, or bubbling, in the region of the thorax, as the anatomists say, or was it a pretty severe throbbing and kicking of the heart, rather creditable to him than otherwise, as showing that the organ had not been left out of the judge's physical contrivance? No matter what it was. The doctor probably would smile at the statement of such trifles to his professional ear. The judge would smile in his turn, and meeting one another's eyes, they would enjoy a hearty laugh together. But a fig for medical advice. The judge will never need it. Pray, Judge Pinekian, look at your watch, now. What, not a glance? It is within 10 minutes of the dinner hour. It surely cannot have slipped your memory that the dinner of today is to be the most important, in its consequences, of all the dinners you ever ate. Yes, precisely the most important, although, in the course of your somewhat eminent career, you have been placed high towards the head of the table, at splendid banquets, and have poured out your festive eloquence to ears yet echoing with Webster's mighty organ tones. No public dinner this, however. It is merely a gathering of some dozen or so of friends from several districts of the state, men of distinguished character and influence, assembling, almost casually, at the house of a common friend, likewise distinguished, who will make them welcome to a little better than his ordinary fare. Nothing in the way of French cookery, but an excellent dinner, nevertheless. Real turtle, we understand, and salmon, tautog, canvasbacks, pig, English mutton, good roast beef, or dainties of that serious kind, fit for substantial country gentlemen, as these honourable persons mostly are. The delicacies of the season, in short, and flavoured by a brand of old Madeira which has been the pride of many seasons. It is the Juno brand, a glorious wine, fragrant, and full of gentle might, a bottled-up happiness, put by for use, a golden liquid, worth more than liquid gold, so rare and admirable, that veteran wine-bibbers count it among their epochs to have tasted it. It drives away the heartache, and substitutes no headache. Could the judge but quaff a glass, it might enable him to shake off the unaccountable lethargy which, for the 10 intervening minutes, and 5 to boot, are already past, has made him such a laggard at this momentous dinner. It would all but revive a dead man. Would you like to sip it now, Judge Pinkian? Alas, this dinner. Have you really forgotten its true object? Then let us whisper it, that you may start at once out of the oaken chair, which really seems to be enchanted, like the one in Camus, or that in which Moll Pitcher imprisoned your own grandfather. But ambition is a talisman more powerful than witchcraft. Start up, then, and, hurrying through the streets, burst in upon the company, that they may begin before the fish is spoiled. They wait for you, and it is little for your interest that they should wait. These gentlemen, need you be told it, have assembled, not without purpose, from every quarter of the state. They are practised politicians, every man of them, and skilled to adjust those preliminary measures which steal from the people, without its knowledge, the power of choosing its own rulers. The popular voice, at the next gubernatorial election, though loud as thunder, will be really but an echo of what these gentlemen shall speak, under their breath, at your friend's festive board. They meet to decide upon their candidate. This little knot of subtle schemers will control the convention, and, through it, dictate to the party. And what worthier candidate, more wise and learned, more noted for philanthropic liberality, true to safe principles, tried oftener by public trusts, more spotless in private character, with a larger stake in the common welfare, and deeper grounded, by hereditary descent, in the faith and practice of the Puritans? What man can be presented for the suffrage of the people, so eminently combining all these claims to the chief rulership as Judge Pinkian here before us? Make haste, then. Do your part. The meed for which you have toiled, and fought, and climbed, and crept, is ready for your grasp. Be present at this dinner, drink a glass or two of that noble wine, make your pledges in as low a whisper as you will, and you rise up from table virtually governor of the glorious old state. Governor Pinkian of Massachusetts. And is there no potent and exhilarating cordial in a certainty like this? It has been the grand purpose of half your lifetime to obtain it. Now, when there needs little more than to signify your acceptance, why do you sit so lumpishly in your great-great-grandfather's oaken chair, as if preferring it to the gubernatorial one? We have all heard of King Log, but, in these jostling times, one of that royal kindred will hardly win the race for an elective chief magistracy. Well, it is absolutely too late for dinner. Turtle, salmon, tautog, woodcock, boiled turkey, Southdown mutton, pig, roast beef, have vanished, or exist only in fragments, with lukewarm potatoes, and gravies crusted over with cold fat. The judge, had he done nothing else, would have achieved wonders with his knife and fork. It was he, you know, of whom it used to be said, in reference to his ogre-like appetite, that his Creator made him a great animal, but that the dinner hour made him a great beast. Persons of his large sensual endowments must claim indulgence, at their feeding time. But, for once, the judge is entirely too late for dinner. Too late, we fear, even to join the party at their wine. The guests are warm and merry, they have given up the judge, and, concluding that the Free Soilers have him, they will fix upon another candidate. Were our friend now to stalk in among them, with that wide-open stare, at once wild and stolid, his ungenial presence would be apt to change their cheer. Neither would it be seemly in Judge Pinkian, generally so scrupulous in his attire, to show himself at a dinner table with that crimson stain upon his shirt bosom. By the by, how came it there? It is an ugly sight, at any rate, and the wisest way for the judge is to button his coat closely over his breast, and, taking his horse and chaise from the livery stable, to make all speed to his own house. There, after a glass of brandy and water, and a mutton chop, a beefsteak, a broiled fowl, or some such hasty little dinner and supper all in one, he had better spend the evening by the fireside. He must toast his slippers a long while, in order to get rid of the chilliness which the air of this vile old house has sent curdling through his veins. Up, therefore, Judge Pinkian, up. You have lost a day. But tomorrow will be here anon. Will you rise, betims, and make the most of it? Tomorrow. 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 We, that are alive, may rise betims tomorrow. As for him that has died today, his morrow will be the resurrection morn. Meanwhile the twilight is glooming upward out of the corners of the room. The shadows of the tall furniture grow deeper, and at first become more definite, then, spreading wider, they lose their distinctness of outline in the dark grey tide of oblivion, as it were, that creeps slowly over the various objects, and the one human figure sitting in the midst of them. The gloom has not entered from without, it has brooded here all day, and now, taking its own inevitable time, will possess itself of everything. The judge's face, indeed, rigid and singularly white, refuses to melt into this universal solvent. Fainter and fainter grows the light. It is as if another double handful of darkness had been scattered through the air. Now it is no longer grey, but sable. There is still a faint appearance at the window, neither a glow, nor a gleam, nor a glimmer. Any phrase of light would express something far brighter than this doubtful perception, or sense, rather, that there is a window there. Has it yet vanished? No, yes, not quite. And there is still the swarthy whiteness. We shall venture to marry these ill-agreeing words, the swarthy whiteness of Judge Pinekian's face. The features are all gone, there is only the paleness of them left. And how looks it now? There is no window. There is no face. An infinite, inscrutable blackness has annihilated sight. Where is our universe? All crumbled away from us, and we, adrift in chaos, may hearken to the gusts of homeless wind, that go sighing and murmuring about in quest of what was once a world. Is there no other sound? One other, and a fearful one. It is the ticking of the judge's watch, which, ever since Hepzibah left the room in search of Clifford, he has been holding in his hand. Be the cause what it may, this little, quiet, never-ceasing throb of time's pulse, repeating its small strokes with such busy regularity, in Judge Pinekian's motionless hand, has an effect of terror, which we do not find in any other accompaniment of the scene. But, listen. That puff of the breeze was louder. It had a tone unlike the dreary and sullen one which has bemoaned itself, and afflicted all mankind with miserable sympathy, for 5 days past. The wind has veered about. It now comes boisterously from the northwest, and, taking hold of the aged framework of the 7 gables, gives it a shake, like a wrestler that would try strength with his antagonist. Another and another sturdy tussle with the blast. The old house creaks again, and makes a vociferous but somewhat unintelligible bellowing in its sooty throat. The big flue, we mean, of its wide chimney, partly in complaint at the rude wind, but rather, as befits their century and a half of hostile intimacy, in tough defiance. A rumbling kind of a bluster roars behind the fireboard. A door has slammed above stairs. A window, perhaps, has been left open, or else is driven in by an unruly gust. It is not to be conceived, beforehand, what wonderful wind instruments are these old timber mansions, and how haunted with the strangest noises, which immediately begin to sing, and sigh, and sob, and shriek, and to smite with sledge-hammers, airy but ponderous, in some distant chamber, and to tread along the entries as with stately footsteps, and rustle up and down the staircase, as with silks miraculously stiff, whenever the gale catches the house with a window open, and gets fairly into it. Would that we were not an attendant spirit here. It is too awful. This clamor of the wind through the lonely house, the judge's quietude, as he sits invisible, and that pertinacious ticking of his watch. As regards Judge Pinekian's invisibility, however, that matter will soon be remedied. The northwest wind has swept the sky clear. The window is distinctly seen. Through its panes, moreover, we dimly catch the sweep of the dark, clustering foliage outside, fluttering with a constant irregularity of movement, and letting in a peep of starlight, now here, now there. Oftener than any other object, these glimpses illuminate the judge's face. But here comes more effectual light. Observe that silvery dance upon the upper branches of the pear tree, and now a little lower, and now on the whole mass of boughs, while, through their shifting intricacies, the moonbeams fall aslant into the room. They play over the judge's figure and show that he has not stirred throughout the hours of darkness. They follow the shadows, in changeful sport, across his unchanging features. They gleam upon his watch. His grasp conceals the dial plate, but we know that the faithful hands have met, for one of the city clocks tells midnight. A man of sturdy understanding, like Judge Pinekian, cares no more for 12 o'clock at night than for the corresponding hour of noon. However just the parallel drawn, in some of the preceding pages, between his Puritan ancestor and himself, it fails in this point. The Pinekian of 2 centuries ago, in common with most of his contemporaries, professed his full belief in spiritual ministrations, although reckoning them chiefly of a malignant character. The Pinekian of tonight, who sits in yonder armchair, believes in no such nonsense. Such, at least, was his creed, some few hours since. His hair will not bristle, therefore, at the stories which, in times when chimney corners had benches in them, where old people sat poking into the ashes of the past, and raking out traditions like live coals, used to be told about this very room of his ancestral house. In fact, these tales are too absurd to bristle even childhood's hair. What sense, meaning, or moral, for example, such as even ghost stories should be susceptible of, can be traced in the ridiculous legend, that, at midnight, all the dead Pinekians are bound to assemble in this parlor. And, pray, for what? Why, to see whether the portrait of their ancestor still keeps its place upon the wall, in compliance with his testamentary directions. Is it worthwhile to come out of their graves for that? We are tempted to make a little sport with the idea. Ghost stories are hardly to be treated seriously any longer. The family party of the defunct Pinekians, we presume, goes off in this wise. First comes the ancestor himself, in his black cloak, steeple hat, and trunk breeches, girt about the waist with a leathern belt, in which hangs his steel-hilted sword. He has a long staff in his hand, such as gentlemen in advanced life used to carry, as much for the dignity of the thing as for the support to be derived from it. He looks up at the portrait, a thing of no substance, gazing at its own painted image. All is safe. The picture is still there. The purpose of his brain has been kept sacred thus long after the man himself has sprouted up in graveyard grass. See. He lifts his ineffectual hand, and tries the frame. All safe. But is that a smile, is it not, rather a frown of deadly import, that darkens over the shadow of his features? The stout colonel is dissatisfied. So decided is his look of discontent as to impart additional distinctness to his features, through which, nevertheless, the moonlight passes, and flickers on the wall beyond. Something has strangely vexed the ancestor. With a grim shake of the head, he turns away. Here come other Pinekians, the whole tribe, in their 6 generations, jostling and elbowing one another, to reach the picture. We behold aged men and grandames, a clergyman with the puritanic stiffness still in his garb and mien, and a red-coated officer of the old French war, and there comes the shop-keeping Pinekian of a century ago, with the ruffles turned back from his wrists, and there the periwigged and brocaded gentleman of the artist's legend, with the beautiful and pensive Alice, who brings no pride out of her virgin grave. All try the picture frame. What do these ghostly people seek? A mother lifts her child, that his little hands may touch it. There is evidently a mystery about the picture, that perplexes these poor Pinekians when they ought to be at rest. In a corner, meanwhile, stands the figure of an elderly man, in a leathern jerkin and breeches, with a carpenter's rule sticking out of his side pocket. He points his finger at the bearded colonel and his descendants, nodding, jeering, mocking, and finally bursting into obstreperous, though inaudible laughter. Indulging our fancy in this freak, we have partly lost the power of restraint and guidance. We distinguish an unlooked-for figure in our visionary scene. Among those ancestral people there is a young man, dressed in the very fashion of today. He wears a dark frock coat, almost destitute of skirts, grey pantaloons, gaiter boots of patent leather, and has a finely wrought gold chain across his breast, and a little silver-headed whalebone stick in his hand. Were we to meet this figure at noonday, we should greet him as young Jaffrey Pinekian, the judge's only surviving child, who has been spending the last 2 years in foreign travel. If still in life, how comes his shadow hither? If dead, what a misfortune! The old Pinekian property, together with the great estate acquired by the young man's father, would devolve on whom? On poor, foolish Clifford, gaunt Hepzibah, and rustic little Phoebe. But another and a greater marvel greets us. Can we believe our eyes? A stout, elderly gentleman has made his appearance. He has an aspect of eminent respectability, wears a black coat and pantaloons, of roomy width, and might be pronounced scrupulously neat in his attire, but for a broad crimson stain across his snowy neckcloth and down his shirt bosom. Is it the judge, or no? How can it be Judge Pinekian? We discern his figure, as plainly as the flickering moonbeams can show us anything, still seated in the oaken chair. Be the apparition whose it may, it advances to the picture, seems to seize the frame, tries to peep behind it, and turns away, with a frown as black as the ancestral one. The fantastic scene just hinted at must by no means be considered as forming an actual portion of our story. We were betrayed into this brief extravagance by the quiver of the moonbeams. They dance hand in hand with shadows, and are reflected in the looking glass, which, you are aware, is always a kind of window or doorway into the spiritual world. We needed relief, moreover, from our too long and exclusive contemplation of that figure in the chair. This wild wind, too, has tossed our thoughts into strange confusion, but without tearing them away from their one determined center. Yonder leaden judge sits immovably upon our soul. Will he never stir again? We shall go mad unless he stirs. You may the better estimate his quietude by the fearlessness of a little mouse, which sits on its hind legs, in a streak of moonlight, close by Judge Pinkian's foot, and seems to meditate a journey of exploration over this great black bulk. Ha! What has startled the nimble little mouse? It is the visage of Grimakin, outside of the window, where he appears to have posted himself for a deliberate watch. This Grimakin has a very ugly look. Is it a cat watching for a mouse, or the devil for a human soul? Would we could scare him from the window. Thank heaven, the night is well nigh past. The moonbeams have no longer so silvery a gleam, nor contrast so strongly with the blackness of the shadows among which they fall. They are paler now, the shadows look grey, not black. The boisterous wind is hushed. What is the hour? Ah! The watch has at last ceased to tick, for the judge's forgetful fingers neglected to wind it up, as usual, at 10 o'clock, being half an hour or so before his ordinary bedtime, and it has run down, for the first time in 5 years. But the great world clock of time still keeps its beat. The dreary night, for, oh, how dreary seems its haunted waste, behind us, gives place to a fresh, transparent, cloudless morn. Blessed, blessed radiance. The day beam, even what little of it finds its way into this always dusky parlor, seems part of the universal benediction, annulling evil, and rendering all goodness possible, and happiness attainable. Will Judge Pinkian now rise up from his chair? Will he go forth, and receive the early sunbeams on his brow? Will he begin this new day, which God has smiled upon, and blessed, and given to mankind? Will he begin it with better purposes than the many that have been spent amiss? Or are all the deep-laid schemes of yesterday as stubborn in his heart, and as busy in his brain, as ever? In this latter case, there is much to do. Will the judge still insist with Hepzibah on the interview with Clifford? Will he buy a safe, elderly gentleman's horse? Will he persuade the purchaser of the old Pinkian property to relinquish the bargain in his favor? Will he see his family physician, and obtain a medicine that shall preserve him, to be an honor and blessing to his race, until the utmost term of patriarchal longevity? Will Judge Pinkian, above all, make due apologies to that company of honorable friends, and satisfy them that his absence from the festive board was unavoidable, and so fully retrieve himself in their good opinion that he shall yet be governor of Massachusetts? And all these great purposes accomplished, will he walk the streets again, with that dog-day smile of elaborate benevolence, sultry enough to tempt flies to come and buzz in it? Or will he, after the tomb-like seclusion of the past day and night, go forth a humbled and repentant man, sorrowful, gentle, seeking no profit, shrinking from worldly honor, hardly daring to love God, but bold to love his fellow man, and to do him what good he may? Will he bear about with him no odious grin of feigned benignity, insolent in its pretense, and loathsome in its falsehood, but the tender sadness of a contrite heart, broken, at last, beneath its own weight of sin? For it is our belief, whatever show of honor he may have piled upon it, that there was heavy sin at the base of this man's being. Rise up, Judge Pinekian. The morning sunshine glimmers through the foliage, and, beautiful and holy as it is, shuns not to kindle up your face. Rise up, thou subtle, worldly, selfish, iron-hearted hypocrite, and make thy choice whether still to be subtle, worldly, selfish, iron-hearted, and hypocritical, or to tear these sins out of thy nature, though they bring the life-blood with them. The avenger is upon thee. Rise up, before it be too late. What? Thou art not stirred by this last appeal? No, not a jot. And there we see a fly, one of your common house flies, such as are always buzzing on the window pane, which has smelt out Governor Pinekian, and alights, now on his forehead, now on his chin, and now, heaven help us, is creeping over the bridge of his nose, towards the would-be chief magistrate's wide-open eyes. Canst thou not brush the fly away? Art thou too sluggish? Thou man, that hadst so many busy projects yesterday. Art thou too weak, that wast so powerful? Not brush away a fly? Nay, then, we give thee up. And hark! The shop bell rings. After hours like these latter ones, through which we have borne our heavy tale, it is good to be made sensible that there is a living world, and that even this old, lonely mansion retains some manner of connection with it. We breathe more freely, emerging from Judge Pinekian's presence into the street before the Seven Gables. 19 Alice's Pose's Uncle Venner, trundling a wheelbarrow, was the earliest person stirring in the neighborhood the day after the storm. Pinekian Street, in front of the house of the Seven Gables, was a far pleasanter scene than a by-lane, confined by shabby fences, and bordered with wooden dwellings of the meaner class, could reasonably be expected to present. Nature made sweet amends, that morning, for the 5 unkindly days which had preceded it. It would have been enough to live for, merely to look up at the wide benediction of the sky, or as much of it as was visible between the houses, genial once more with sunshine. Every object was agreeable, whether to be gazed at in the breadth, or examined more minutely. Such, for example, were the well-washed pebbles and gravel of the sidewalk, even the sky-reflecting pools in the center of the street, and the grass, now freshly verdant, that crept along the base of the fences, on the other side of which, if one peeped over, was seen the multifarious growth of gardens. Vegetable productions, of whatever kind, seemed more than negatively happy, in the juicy warmth and abundance of their life. The Pinekian elm, throughout its great circumference, was all alive, and full of the morning sun and a sweet-tempered little breeze, which lingered within this verdant sphere, and set 1,000 leafy tongues a-whispering all at once. This aged tree appeared to have suffered nothing from the gale. It had kept its boughs unshattered, and its full complement of leaves, and the whole in perfect verdure, except a single branch, that, by the earlier change with which the elm tree sometimes prophesies the autumn, had been transmuted to bright gold. It was like the golden branch that gained Aeneas and the Sibyl admittance into Hades. This one mystic branch hung down before the main entrance of the 7 Gables, so nigh the ground that any passer-by might have stood on tiptoe and plucked it off. Presented at the door, it would have been a symbol of his right to enter, and be made acquainted with all the secrets of the house. So little faith is due to external appearance, that there was really an inviting aspect over the venerable edifice, conveying an idea that its history must be a decorous and happy one, and such as would be delightful for a fireside tale. Its windows gleamed cheerfully in the slanting sunlight. The lines and tufts of green moss, here and there, seemed pledges of familiarity and sisterhood with nature, as if this human dwelling place, being of such old date, had established its prescriptive title among primeval oaks and whatever other objects, by virtue of their long continuance, have acquired a gracious right to be. A person of imaginative temperament, while passing by the house, would turn, once and again, and peruse it well, its many peaks, consenting together in the clustered chimney, the deep projection over its basement story, the arched window, imparting a look, if not of grandeur, yet of antique gentility, to the broken portal over which it opened. The luxuriance of gigantic burdocks, near the threshold, he would note all these characteristics, and be conscious of something deeper than he saw. He would conceive the mansion to have been the residence of the stubborn old Puritan, Integrity, who, dying in some forgotten generation, had left a blessing in all its rooms and chambers, the efficacy of which was to be seen in the religion, honesty, moderate competence, or upright poverty and solid happiness, of his descendants, to this day. One object, above all others, would take root in the imaginative observer's memory. It was the great tuft of flowers, weeds, you would have called them, only a week ago, the tuft of crimson-spotted flowers, in the angle between the 2 front gables. The old people used to give them the name of Alice's Posies, in remembrance of fair Alice Pinekian, who was believed to have brought their seeds from Italy. They were flaunting in rich beauty and full bloom today, and seemed, as it were, a mystic expression that something within the house was consummated. It was but little after sunrise, when Uncle Venner made his appearance, as aforesaid, impelling a wheelbarrow along the street. He was going his matutinal rounds to collect cabbage leaves, turnip tops, potato skins, and the miscellaneous refuse of the dinner pot, which the thrifty housewives of the neighborhood were accustomed to put aside, as fit only to feed a pig. Uncle Venner's pig was fed entirely, and kept in prime order, on these eleemosynary contributions, insomuch that the patched philosopher used to promise that, before retiring to his farm, he would make a feast of the portly grunter, and invite all his neighbors to partake of the joints and spare ribs which they had helped to fatten. Miss Hepzibah Pinkian's housekeeping had so greatly improved, since Clifford became a member of the family, that her share of the banquet would have been no lean one, and Uncle Venner, accordingly, was a good deal disappointed not to find the large earthen pan, full of fragmentary eatables, that ordinarily awaited his coming at the back doorstep of the Seven Gables. "I never knew Miss Hepzibah so forgetful before," said the patriarch to himself. "She must have had a dinner yesterday, no question of that. She always has one, nowadays. So where's the pot liquor and potato skins, I ask? Shall I knock, and see if she's stirring yet?" "No, no, toonty do. If little Phoebe was about the house, I should not mind knocking, but Miss Hepzibah, likely as not, would scowl down at me out of the window, and look cross, even if she felt pleasantly. So, I'll come back at noon." With these reflections, the old man was shutting the gate of the little backyard. Creaking on its hinges, however, like every other gate and door about the premises, the sound reached the ears of the occupant of the northern gable, one of the windows of which had a side view towards the gate. "Good morning, Uncle Venner," said the daguerreotypist, leaning out of the window. "Do you hear nobody stirring?" "Not a soul," said the man of patches. "But that's no wonder. 'Tis barely half an hour past sunrise, yet. But I'm really glad to see you, Mr. Holgrave. There's a strange, lonesome look about this side of the house, so that my heart misgave me, somehow or other, and I felt as if there was nobody alive in it. The front of the house looks a good deal cheerier, and Alice's posies are blooming there beautifully, and if I were a young man, Mr. Holgrave, my sweetheart should have one of those flowers in her bosom, though I risked my neck climbing for it. Well, and did the wind keep you awake last night?" "It did, indeed," answered the artist, smiling. "If I were a believer in ghosts, and I don't quite know whether I am or not, I should have concluded that all the old Pinkians were running riot in the lower rooms, especially in Miss Hepzibah's part of the house. But it is very quiet now. Yes, Miss Hepzibah will be apt to oversleep herself, after being disturbed, all night, with the racket," said Uncle Venner. "But it would be odd, now, wouldn't it, if the judge had taken both his cousins into the country along with him? I saw him go into the shop yesterday." "At what hour?" inquired Holgrave. "Oh, along in the forenoon," said the old man. "Well, well. I must go my rounds, and so must my wheelbarrow. But I'll be back here at dinner time, for my pig likes a dinner as well as a breakfast. No meal time, and no sort of victuals, ever seems to come amiss to my pig. Good morning to you. And, Mr. Holgrave, if I were a young man, like you, I'd get one of Alice's posies, and keep it in water till Phoebe comes back." "I have heard," said the daguerreotypist, as he drew in his head, "that the water of Maule's well suits those flowers best." Here the conversation ceased, and Uncle Venner went on his way. For half an hour longer, nothing disturbed the repose of the Seven Gables, nor was there any visitor, except a carrier boy, who, as he passed the front doorstep, threw down one of his newspapers, for Hepzibah, of late, had regularly taken it in. After a while, there came a fat woman, making prodigious speed, and stumbling as she ran up the steps of the shop door. Her face glowed with fire heat, and, it being a pretty warm morning, she bubbled and hissed, as it were, as if all afry with chimney warmth, and summer warmth, and the warmth of her own corpulent velocity. She tried the shop door, it was fast. She tried it again, with so angry a jar that the bell tinkled angrily back at her. "The deuce take old maid Pinkian," muttered the irascible housewife. "Think of her pretending to set up a cent shop, and then lying abed till noon. These are what she calls gentlefolks, I suppose. But I'll either start her ladyship, or break the door down." She shook it accordingly, and the bell, having a spiteful little temper of its own, rang obstreperously, making its remonstrances heard, not, indeed, by the ears for which they were intended, but by a good lady on the opposite side of the street. She opened the window, and addressed the impatient applicant. "You'll find nobody there, Mrs. Gubbins." "But I must and will find somebody here," cried Mrs. Gubbins, inflicting another outrage on the bell. "I want a half-pound of pork, to fry some first-rate flounders for Mr. Gubbins's breakfast, and, lady or not, old maid Pinkian shall get up and serve me with it." "But do hear reason, Mrs. Gubbins," responded the lady opposite. "She, and her brother too, have both gone to their cousins, Judge Pinkian's at his country seat. There's not a soul in the house, but that young daguerreotype man that sleeps in the north gable. I saw old Hepzibah and Clifford go away yesterday, and a queer couple of ducks they were, paddling through the mud puddles. They're gone, I'll assure you." "And how do you know they're gone to this?"